behalf of the committee for the speaker series, we want to thank La Raza Historical Society of Santa Clara, Bob Nunez, Aspire McNair's Scholars Program here at San Jose State, the College of Social Sciences, the Department of Chicana and Chicano Studies, and Sofia Redondo of Señorita Studios. Please, everybody, thank our sponsors for helping make tonight possible. And this committee that has been working hard all year to bring this program to you tonight. This consists of Dr. Gregorio Mora Torres, Professor in Chicano and Chicano Studies, Erlinda Yanez, Department Coordinator for Chicano and Chicano Studies, Dr. Maria Cruz, Director of the San Jose State Aspire McNair Scholars Program, Dr. Jonathan Gomez, Assistant Professor in Chicano and Chicano Studies, and myself, Dr. Esteban Ascona. As I have said, this is the third year of the speaker series, and most of you should have a piece of paper in tonight's program, and that piece of paper is given to you when you checked in. And so we want to invite you, before you leave tonight, to please fill out this form and give us your ideas about who would be great people to invite to be a part of future speakers in the series. So through the series, we're looking to recognize someone who's had a profound influence on Chicano, Mexicano politics, culture, art, the economy, or law. Someone who's impacted the community through their social activism here in the greater Santa Clara Valley.
It's a really special honor now to welcome up Erica. Erica is an undergraduate student here that I've had the opportunity to have in my classes, and then we actually co-developed an initiative on this campus called the Culture Counts Reading Series. And you know, it's students like her that make my job you know, feel so, as I say, I have a dream job, you know what I mean? And students like her that make it so. And so she's going to share a poem with you today, so if we can help welcome Erica to stage, that'll be amazing.
Hello, my name is Erica, and first of all, I want to thank the organizers of this event for putting this together, and also the Chicano Studies Department. I think they really helped me see my context in this institution. And yeah, so I'll be reading a poem. I don't really have a title for it because I'm not really a poet, but it's kind of about my mother and my grandmother, and kind of the women who came before us. So yeah. They lead you somewhere, the braids of fruit along the 99, the trails that lie beneath the trees. They tell stories of joy, laughter, pain, sacrifice, reminding you of the times your mom braided your hair, and you cried because she pulled your roots with her brown hands, so much so that they stretched the brown skin on your forehead and held back the tears. These were the hands that harnessed the strength that I had yet to discover, the same hands that pulled the fruit off the trees, the same hands that fed you, the same hands that allowed you to grow, the same hands that were shackled while transcending borders, the same hands that pulled the maize in the milpa, the same hands that braided the stories from rural Mexico to rural California. I look at her hands as they wipe my tears, and I feel the crevices and the valleys, and they hold the dams that kept the water flowing from the rivers that guided her home. Te aguantas, she said, y me aguanté. Pero nos aguantamos la sed, el hambre, la soledad, el frío, la distancia, el rechazo, y nos aguantamos el regreso del río. My mother finishes untangling the twisted knots in my hair, and she calls me a greñuda with a smile. And she leads me to a mirror where I not only see a reflection of myself, but I see a reflection of her, a reflection of her skin, her smile, her hands, her pain, herself walking, waking up before the sun, herbicides over her head like an invisible gun, hereditary resilience from the threads she spun. A story that is hers, her eyes cross with mine, only to tell the story of the times my abuelita braided her hair, that allowed her to see her reflection in the rivers that led us home. That's it.
Erica, that was beautiful. I'd like to now invite Ramon Martinez to the stage.
Buenas noches, good evening. I'm Ramon Martinez, and they asked me to say a few words and introduce Jose Carrasco. It's because I'm the oldest possible student they could find. A lot of where I came from Bakersfield, California in 1969 to San Jose State. That's the first year Mexican-American Graduate Studies started here. And I had very deep, profound reasons to come. That was to leave Bakersfield. But the Mexican-American Graduate Studies program here, that was the first Chicano Studies master's program in the United States. It started right here. All the other programs were BA programs. But I think that tells you about the people who started it. They wanted the students to get a basic education first, you know, in whatever their passion is. If you're English, if you're business, if you're nursing, you got to get that degree first, and then the polish was Chicano Studies. In the community, Jose actually began to work, and the Raza community started doing things as far back as 1964. And so there was a lot going on in the community. And then remember that the huelga itself started in around 65, somewhere way back there. And so all that activity is what led to there being a Chicano Studies program here. And so most of what we're going to hear tonight is about 1969 this way. But I just wanted you to know that Jose had been out there since 64. When I met him, I just wanted to say something to the students. When I met him, the basic thing that he did was he talked about, students, you are not here to find out who you are. You already are. You're done. What you're here to find out is find people who believe like you believe, and are going to help you do whatever it is you want to get done. So that was real important about what he and that faculty did at that time. Lastly, Carrasco was my mentor. You know, all of students, you need to find people who know, or have more experience than you. Doesn't mean they know more than you, or they know exactly what to do, but they've been around longer. And so Carrasco is my mentor, taught me the following that basically never changed. One, you are not alone. You will not achieve anything that's important in this life by yourself. It can't be done. And so you need to work with others. What you do with others, that's what's going to end up being something that matters. And lastly, I just wanted to say, I talked to his kids earlier because when they said, talk about Carrasco, I said, well, what he's taught his kids is what really matters. And one of the kids said, he taught me never to question who I am. I'm a Mexican, and go from there. He says, don't keep, you know, there's so many labels and they change every 3-4 years. You are who you are. His other son said that his father, if anything, is an organizer. And he said that his father taught him that a great organizer, nobody knows who you are. Nobody knows who you are. That's a great organizer because your job is to make people be able to do what they need to do. And so I just want to say that's Carrasco, is that he's spent 50, 60 years, and he's still going. He works in communities all over the country, all the time. Of all races and creeds, he's always working with everyone, and he has tried all his years not to be famous, but those of us who have been around him know that there's nothing you're going to learn in Chicano Studies that ever happened here that he was not part of. And so it's real important for people to remember that. So thank you very much, and I hope you have a good time with Professor Jose A. Carrasco.
Buenas noches. Let me tell you a little story about Jose before we start. I graduated with my Ph.D. from UC Irvine in '89, and I was going to be a Latin American historian, but in '89 I was tired and I decided to take some time off, and so I went to work at San Francisco State. And I was teaching there. And one day, a friend of mine told me that they were hiring people at San Jose State, and that I should get in touch with Jose Carrasco, who was basically running the program at that time, Mexican American Studies program. And so I gave him I think I sent him an email, a letter, not an email, a letter. There are no emails then. And he responded within 3 days. He gave me a call and he said, hey, let's get together, and we can talk. And we did talk. He says, you know what? I want you to come and teach. Okay? But I have no funding. Okay? And I said, wait, it was kind of hard for me to teach without money. And so he said, Gregorio, where's your obligation? You're a Chicano. And you need to be committed to the Chicano. And you have an obligation to teach the Chicano community. That idea of obligation is deeply rooted in the Chicano movement. And so I said, okay, Jose, I'll do it, but, I get it. Eventually, he said, you know what, if I find the funding, I will pay you. And obviously, I don't know if he was trying to test me out, but he eventually, he paid me right away. But that's really where we can start thinking about Jose Carrasco and his character. He has an interesting background. He's born in Colorado. And he's part of this tradition of Mexicans coming from Mexico. But there's another tradition of people from other parts of the United States, Tejanos, people from Arizona, okay? People from New Mexico coming to work in California in the 1940s. Okay? And so Carrasco is part of this larger migrations of Mexicans that come from Mexico and from many, many parts of the United States, and they're all coming to California. So to start with, why don't we have him talk about, how his family ended up in Colorado?
We ended up in Colorado or in California because we were thrown out of Colorado. The thing is that Colorado was really was really like much of the South, the Midwest. It was sugar beet country, and with the discovery of sugar beet here, the U.S. government, it was called the Dingley something Act, Taft-Hartley-Dingley Act, was passed to basically do two things. One was aimed at criminals, and the other was aimed at trying to protect or to create a protective shield for this new emerging product called sugar beet. And because this was going to be a homegrown product of sugar, which would not have to be transported from across oceans like Hawaii or from Cuba or wherever. And so to do this, they found that they needed a new labor force. A labor force that was not going to be coming in for the crop and then going back, which is what, of course, the guest worker process is all about. You know, workers brought in for the season and then shipped back immediately after the season was over. So this crop required a skilled crop, or skilled workers who knew the crop well enough so that there were 4 cycles to it, and every cycle was critical to the next part of it, growing and developing and so on. So because of that, they brought Chicano families in. They tried to lure in the families so that they could get them to stay. And of course the company stores and all those kinds of things that you found with the coal mines and other places were also basically a much a part of the agricultural life. But that's where my, family came from. I've got some of my sisters here, and I told them not to say anything and don't boo nothing, because one thing, we learned coming from a big family, there were 7 of us. And at any time, when someone would talk about something that happened back when, we all agreed about something happened. But if you asked each one of us what it was exactly, we would get 7 different stories. And so that's one of the things that I, sort of never forgot when it came to dealing with people, is that as long as you've got more than 2 people, at some place, you're going to get more than 1 story. And so you'll probably get a different story today for some of the things you might ask about. But that's how we ended up there. My family out of Chihuahua, my father out of Chihuahua, Camargo, Chihuahua, and my mother out of Torreon, Coahuila. And so we ended up coming from there. My father ended up in the shipyards, while they were hiring, because of course once the thing was over, all the, not only the females were let go, but the Mexicanos or anybody else that wasn't white, was obviously let go from the shipyards, and they, reverted to business as usual. But we ended up in Santa Clara. There was a time when you knew the difference between San Jose and Santa Clara, because there were beautiful little areas, little orchards between everything. Between here and San Francisco, you had San Jose, then you hit then Santa Clara, then you hit orchards, and then you hit Sunnyvale, then you hit orchards, then you hit Mountain View, then you hit orchards and fields, and then you hit, and all the way through, and from the mountain, one mountainside to another, you look out and you saw these, in the springtime, you would see this valley of nothing but blossoms of white and blue and pink, and but that's another story. Anyway, we ended up in Santa Clara, and we ended up in what I used to refer to, and I kind of refer to still, as sort of Spanish town, Spanish families, not Spanish Mexicanos, but Spanish Spaniards, and like most communities, there were some beautiful people who treated us decently, and there were some who were just, vicious as hell. So growing up there, our first, or at least for us, me anyway, we lived in a little shack that was behind this beautiful old house and big yard, owned by Doña Juanita and Burgos. And she had 6 sons, and I mean, they were within a 2-block radius. All the sons were there with their families, and they were basically, okay. She was pretty hard. So a lot of the neighbors didn't like us. So I experienced a lot of that early hate and distrust and that sort of racism, if you want. Walking down the street and then having an old lady standing at the doorway looking at you, and kind of you just sort of keep on walking. But anyway, that's how we ended up in Santa Clara. So,
What are your favorite words? Cachupin.
Chupin,
What does it mean?
you know, if I knew what it means, I probably hadn't used it, or wouldn't use it. Chupin really was, you know, basically I used the term for Spaniards really back when, because the distinction was very clear. One of the beautiful things about Santa Clara is that Santa Clara was basically still in the 1940s, was still, and we got there probably around 1940, 43, 42, 43. Santa Clara was full of first generation ethnics, Italiano, Portuguese, Okies, from Okieville, a few Mexicanos. The only, you know, there were a couple of older families, stable families that had been around for a while. Jose Vasconcelos, not Vasconcelos, but Jose, the author, Ocho.
Oh, Villarreal.
Jose Villarreal, his family lived a block away. So if you ever, any of you, if you've never read Pocho, pick it up. Pick it up, and it's not only an exciting book, novel, it's also very much what that experience was growing up in Santa Clara County or in this whole area, whether it was San Jose, wherever. The experience of going from being the problem with, you know, speaking Spanish, losing it by the 3rd grade, the whole problem of meeting people and knowing people and of course fighting off the no notion, you Mexicans and you whatever. All of that is in that novel. All of that is there. Jose Villarreal, his family there were probably about 8 kids in his family. And he uses the word or the name Richard in his book, but that was his younger brother, who I grew up with, and we were so much of that experience of that Pocho is, basically what was true for I think most of us. But because there were so many different ethnicities coming in, the young people, the kids, sort of we disregarded all of the other things. When you grew up together, you got to know each other. You went to school from kindergarten through, so by the time you're in the 3rd or 4th grade, you know everybody. And you've been going to school with them all the way through. And in most cases, if you succeeded in going through high school, you probably knew them all, by the time you got there. That made it tolerable. Whereas the older families, the adults might have been prejudiced, Españoles in particular, trying to protect their area, their little, they don't call it barrio, but that little area, what they had, I called it little Spain for them. And the kids though, their children often ended up playing with us and ended up growing up with us and over time, even in their marriages and whatever else that took place.
After your father stopped working in shipbuilding, what kind of work did he do besides, was he working in agriculture or canneries? Because there's also racism in the canneries.
Yeah, my father in the shipyard, had an accident. He, some of the big pipes and stuff fell on his legs, and so they ripped into the legs, and he had to be in the hospital for a while. Then he had some other problems where the early heart operation where they split them all the way across the bottom and so on. So he was tied up in the hospital for, it seemed like a year maybe. But in the meantime, the thing that was good for us is that when we came in from Colorado, from Fort Morgan, Colorado, the Colonia they called it, it wasn't just our family. There were clusters of families. There were clusters of families where there were maybe 2 or 3 generations of the families moving at the same time. And they all moved into Santa Clara. So within that little space of Santa Clara, within maybe about a half-mile radius, these families were there. So oftentimes they gave each other help. Where we having problems just coming in kind of towards the end, but we were able to live with some of these other families for a little while. For a while, Prattville Cannery, which was one of the big safeguards and one of the big saving graces for Chicanos, just like it was for a lot of others, had a nursery in the back of the cannery, and they had little shacks there where we lived for a little bit, until we were able to find this other little shack, and where we eventually spent about 8-9 years before we actually were able to buy a place, working in the fields, and then coming back to school, usually late, usually after the walnuts, or where the walnuts, if any of you ever picked walnuts, you come back with your hands all stained, and everybody knew who you were. Everybody knew that you were one of those working in the fields, cars driving by and screaming out, Mexicans, hey! That was part of the annual, the daily kind of life's experience.
You picked a lot of crops in the beginning in the springtime.
You picked everywhere. This valley, this was the fruit valley of the world. That's what they called it. The fruit valley of the world. Prunes were big. Peaches, apricots, cherries. This was the main market. Pears, berries, blackberries, onions, tomatoes, everything. So you went from one crop to another crop to another crop. Down the line, some of us picked apples further to the north.
One of the things about agriculture is the fact that the entire family collaborated. You had little kids doing specific tasks. And so what kind of work were you doing when you were at that age?
Yeah, you worked with your older brothers and sisters picking crops. You started out with a little lard bucket, the little lard buckets you used to have. You started out with that and you ended up the big buckets, and that was working in the fields. That was working in the, if not that, the big baskets, picking string beans or whatever it might have been. Yeah, that was just part of the journey that you had at the time. After a while, these crops disappeared, and with the disappearance of the crops, the canneries disappeared, and with the disappearance of the canneries, a whole industry of opportunity for La Raza disappeared. So for a lot of us, we were able to graduate from working in the fields, working in the canneries, where you actually got a salary, and and with that, you were actually able to have a home, and then to pay rent, and to do things like this, even if it was seasonal. Once they disappeared, they followed the fruit. They followed the fruit into the valley.
Jose, there are Mexicanos practically everywhere in the Santa Clara Valley. You have little communities in San Jose, you have communities in Alviso, you have communities in Union City, New York. You can even find Mexicanos in Cupertino, Los Gatos, Mountain View. Okay. But downtown San Jose is the heart of the community. So how do you remember downtown San Jose? Because the people in the 1940s, the Mexicanos and the Mexican Americans, basically referred to themselves as la Colonia Mexicana. How do you keep in touch with each other?
You didn't, not much. Growing up, the school you went to pretty much became if there was a barrio, that was the area of your barrio. Santa Clara never really had the pure barrio because it was such a melting mix. But once you got out of Santa Clara and you came into San Jose, things sort of shifted. If you were someplace, you were going to be, if you were a certain area, you were in Burnett. If you were a certain area, you were in Woodrow. Certain area, and once you got off the bus on Santa Clara Street, because that's where the bus ran, and you ventured in either direction, you were going to end up, you know, if you were guys, you were going to end up having to either run out or fight to stay, to get in and to meet people, rules, if you will. And so you learned quickly that the only way you were going to be able to visit some of these places if you were willing to fight your way into those communities. And so,
But there's a big difference between today, where they have gangs, and even if you look at them in the way that they think you disrespect them, then they'll come and beat you up and maybe sometimes kill you. In your time, it's basically fist fights.
mainly, yeah, although there was more than that. Some of these places were pretty definite, pretty rough. Santa Clara never had the barrio like Mountain View. Sunnyvale, Mountain View was a major, they had their own sal si puedes. Then of course San Jose, and if you have read anything about Cesar, sal si puedes, of course, is is the area he comes out of. But these communities, they were still, they could be rough, depending on how far you wanted to go.
But there was a lot of things that the Mexicanos could do. As a group, they would celebrate Cinco de Mayo, the 6 de Septiembre. They would come down to watch movies at Teatro Liberty. And so there are things like that keep them together.
Well, I mean, it gave them a place that didn't put them together. They went to the theater because my mother would go to the theater because they were giving away free plates. That was their new, someday we were going to have a table to put those plates on. And so, that was every week or so they would give a different, a plate or a bowl. And so people came and they went to the theater. Once you got out, bus stop, get in the bus, go home. So if you wanted to venture deeply or too deep into some place, you were going to find out quickly that there would be a price if you were going to stick in that area and interact with people and get to know them. Once you did that, you were welcome anytime you went in.
One last question before we finish this first part. One of the things that I have always known about you is the fact that your family has a very strong interest in baseball. Your father, in spite of the fact that he was injured, he was the manager of a baseball team. And all of your brothers were also playing baseball. Tell us a little bit about your love for baseball and the fact that there's a Liga Mexicana in the area.
Yeah, my father, in fact, most of the families that came from Fort Morgan to Santa Clara, most of the men had played baseball back in the Midwest. They played baseball against other cities like Greeley, all these little towns that are all from Wyoming, all the way around Colorado, those areas. They would play baseball against different teams. These weren't all Chicano teams. They were just baseball teams. So when they came here, a lot of them picked up the baseball again and started playing baseball. So they had a team here that was called El Patio. El Patio, if I remember right, used to be somewhere like on South 10th Street and somewhere on Alamo or somewhere.
Oh.
And then it was a restaurant. It was a restaurant where you walk down. It's a beautiful garden area with a bar. This was the sponsor of the baseball team. And so they played the Merchants, and it sounded like there was an Italiano team. There were other teams that they would play against. Then somewhere in the late 40s, early 50s, the Mexican league started. And so the teams from here, the Patio team started playing Stockton, Tracy, Sacramento, Modesto, and all this area. And that was kind of where they sort of continued to play ball. It lasted, my father and his friends and about 2-3 years, all of us had come back, or at least. But, so we decided to play baseball, and we picked up this team and rebuilt the old baseball team here, and then connected with the league that was still left, started playing baseball. So we traveled on weekends and play baseball, and so that lasted maybe 4 or 5 years, and then there was, people started getting married and on and whatever else, so.
Okay, let's move on to the next facet. After you graduated from Santa Clara, Santa Clara High School?
Yeah.
Okay. Why do you choose to join the paratroops, the you're airborne?
Really, because I have no place else to go. The jobs like Lockheed and some of those were just starting to come in. And they were actually coming to the high schools to recruit workers for like Lockheed, but they weren't recruiting you. They were recruiting Portuguese, they were recruiting whites, but not you. You go and you apply for jobs, they weren't there. The closest you were able to get to a job was still the cannery. And that was seasonal, part-time, seasonal. So, at least for a lot of us, that's how we saw it. We just, I didn't think plus, I had meaning in our life, military was just the way of life. All of the men, and even some of the women in my family, that was something you did. You went in the military.
The life in the military actually allowed you to travel. And you went south, and what were your impressions of the South?
Well, yeah, I traveled some. I kind of grew up in the South. I spent years going in and out of the South, always coming back to Virginia, always coming back into North Carolina, where the Special Forces out in North Carolina, Fort Benning, Georgia, was Special Forces out of Fort Benning, Georgia. So we always came back to those places, and so a lot of ways I kind of grew up there a little bit different. It was a different life, a different place. It was the first time I think I ever really experienced culture in a way. The culture here was a culture of you stay in this place and you stay in that place and everything's okay. But once you moved out of this line or other, it was there was tension. Here, there were no rules saying you couldn't play baseball like Little League, but you couldn't play. That's just the way it was. You weren't picked. So most of us grew up, never even knowing that Little League existed later. It was a place where, they didn't say you couldn't do this, but you just never. So the rules here were not clear. They were not like definite. The South, everything was clear. Everything was clear. It was so clear that the consequence was no question. The consequence, you did this or you did that, and you could disappear overnight. You went into the wrong community there to meet, women, some folks who didn't, didn't have enough sense to be a little civil, it didn't come back, even if they were military. The South was a place of clarity, and the funny thing about it is that it was one of the things that later when I started to play with poetry, not that I understood poetry, I was just playing with it. I discovered that I found myself thinking back to the South for clarity, because the feeling and emotion was so clear. you know, after, just to shoot ahead, after, you know, there was some conversation about, the thing I'm always asked about when I come in was the Roosevelt walkout. The kids walked out of Roosevelt School. And, you know, and the big question they want to ask is, what role did you play in, you know, I really didn't play much of a role. So, you know, I wasn't playing a role as much as it happened, and I just happened to happen. When the kids walked out, the day before the kids walked out, two of my students came to me to complain about the physical ed teacher who was abusing, or who liked to manhandle them. Kid named Charlie and Johnny. And so when they were talking to me, I was thinking to myself, geez, you know, do I want to get into this? I said, you know, are you sure you're feeling this way? Maybe go talk to him. So, you know, talk to him, tell him you'd like to talk to him and so on. And so that day after my last class, I was getting things ready for the next day. They came in, and Charlie was crying, and he had a big bruise on his face. And Johnny, his friend, told me what happened. They went, tried to talk to the guy, and the guy got upset, hit Charlie in the face, knocked him down, and told him to get the hell out of there. So I told him, go home. I'll take care of him. I went and talked to the principal. And the funny thing about this is that this guy was probably the best principal in the district. He was a good principal, but this guy was his friend, see? This guy who played golf with him, the PE coach, was supposedly a black belt. He got out there. And so I went and I told the principal, look, this is what's happened. The kids have told me this. So he starts telling me, Jose, you know, you don't want to believe everything kids say. You know, you know, kids aren't funny. I said, look, Dan, I worked with kids a lot before I started teaching here. And, you know, and I kind of know when kids are saying, you know, telling me the truth. And so he suddenly got very, he looked at me, he said, you mind your own business. You're going to go a long way in this field, and you just mind your own business, and you know, and let other people take care of their business. And then he said, no, you know, get out. So I walked out. I didn't have my credential at the time because I was an intern. I was an English intern teacher. I was going to get my credential at the end of that year. And so it just happened that I had a class that night for my professor that I was supposed to be working with. And so I told her, look, this has happened, and this is what this is, you know, this guy's saying, and I can't live like that with this guy. I can't be there knowing that this is happening. I've got to talk to this guy, and tomorrow I got to go in and I got to invite this guy to have a beer because, you know, I got to get this straightened out. And she said, it surprised me because I was expecting, you can't do that. You know, you just, but she says, you know, Jose, you do what you have to do. And if we don't get your credential there, we'll get it someplace else. So, okay, so the next day I went into him with the idea of talking to him. And I'm standing in front of my door, and here comes Charlie and a bunch of the kids saying, hey, are you going to walk out with us? I said, well, you know, what? Oh, no, nothing. They started walking. I said, wait a minute, come back here, you assholes. You know, so I go up and I reach out and I grab a few of them and I pull them into a classroom and I said, now, what the hell are you talking about? Oh, we got to walk out. Hey, look, you know, I'm trying to give them all the reason not to do it, right? And part of it is because I don't want to do it. I don't want to have, I mean, I don't want to have this happen. It's my job. I just, you know. And then one of them hit me with something that I had said to them in the classroom. he said, you know, Mr. Carrasco, you're the person who's ever talked to us about, sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. You know? Says, you know, when it's right, sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. But that time, all I could do was swallow my tongue and say, let's go. So we walked out, went out. I'm sharing this with you because at that moment, at that time, the only thing I knew was that I was leaving my job. I knew it was gonna happen, but later on, of course, I got fired that same day. The principal told me very clearly, look, you're all through here. You're not coming back. Finish the school year, but that's it. I said, yeah, good. That's a little story. But the reason I'm raising it is because I had to somehow or other make sense of this to myself. I had to somehow or other try to get this, and so the only way I could do it was to write a poem. And I couldn't write it about the walkout because it didn't make sense for me to say, hey, I walked out, or this happened, that happened, I got fired. But I have to go back into my feelings from the South. Kind of remembering those emotions that I had in the South. And so I wrote a poem after I went home and told my wife, got fired. Yeah, and I think my daughter, who's she was about 2, and so I wrote a poem. And one of the things about, if you've ever read any of my poetry, usually it sounds like anything but what I'm supposed to be talking about. So it said, like I said, melt thy blush, sweet lady, for the flower spring has fluttered beyond reach and left me with tears of salt. Full of dreamers, to pocket the world in ecstasy. But had I not shamed love with question and analysis, and truth remaining obscured in human paradise, yet pride did tease your petal, and I indulged in the vanity of human wishes. That was the South for me. That was the emotions and the honesty. That was the only way I could explain for myself what happened to me, what I did. That was a whole other story, but anyway, to give you an example of what the South meant, and that's what I loved about the South. It was as ugly as it was beautiful. It was as ugly as it was beautiful. The lynchings were still happening, and so. Anyway,
One of the during the Roosevelt walkout, I think it was April '68. There was a lot of support from the community. It is the beginning of a group called United People Arriba. You have individuals like Sofia Mendoza. There's also another interesting individual by the name of Jack Brito. And then you have teachers, or some of the teachers, that were also supporting the students. So you really felt that alone, or?
That was a different time. I first met Sophie and Jack back in '60. It was right when I came back from the Llano. I had been organizing with the Council of Churches, the Northern California Council of Churches, and I had been asked to go into the Llano to work with the farm workers when they were trying to organize to fight off the first elections that were going to take place. So when I came back about not quite a year later, I went back into Alviso to organize, but a friend of mine that I had brought in to work with me had moved in and he was doing a good job, so I was sort of moving around. I bumped into Sophie and Jack and them when they were just putting United People Arriba together. And one of the things that was happening is that they were going after the school. This was around 66, 7, somewhere there. And so, you know, they finally got a big break. And it wasn't so much a walkout as it was that the parents that they brought together and stuff came in. And they were able to get rid of a principal who was part of a big family in Santa Clara County, named Buxer, who'd been there for quite a while. And they got rid of the vice principal and the teachers. They got rid of a good number of teachers. That was about 66, somewhere in there, 67, 66. When I, later on, when I had come back in here and I was going through that internship, it just happened that Roosevelt, the year before, had gotten rid of those people. And so the district called and talked to, you know, my professor Schofield, who was really she was an old teacher I had before, in English classes. And so she then asked me if I would be willing to go there. She told me what had happened, and I said, yeah, I'll go there. So that's how I ended up going to Roosevelt, is that, that took place. But this action, this walkout was kind of like a walkout. It wasn't the whole students though, it was just more parents and some teachers, not a whole lot of them, that had happened previously, a couple of years or a year before. So when we went in, or when I went in, and there were about maybe 5 new teachers. Myself, Consuelo, a science teacher, several young Gabacha teachers who were really good. I mean, the kids really enjoyed them, liked them, and a new principal, and a new vice principal. The vice principal was an ex-priest who, after the walkout, and when the kids were brought into the auditorium, and when some of the kids were allowed to get up and make their presentations about what was happening to them and why they walked out, I looked way up on top of the second floor of the auditorium, and I found the vice principal, Jim Murphy, crouched up there hiding. This guy was a vice principal who every time, the Mexican kids got in trouble, if it was with a white kid or a black kid, or they would let that kid go, and the Mexicano would have to get on their knees and do penance. That was what this guy would do with them. And so he was one of the ones who, after that. But so the walkout that I was involved with came in '68, and the reason I remember is because I got fired, but that was kind of a combination of things. Sophie and Jack were also central to the second walkout, but in a different way. Not necessarily the walkout itself. The walkout was not dealing with the parents themselves. They didn't have anything to do with it. The walkout took place because my students, Charlie and Johnny, were being tutored by some of the Chicano students here at San Jose State. We're already, looking for something, and then it was close to the Cinco de Mayo. And so after what happened to Charlie and Johnny, well, they told their tutors from here what happened, and that's when some of the Chicano students from here started to push them, to walk out. And so that was really the thing that forced the walkout.
But things didn't really go better for you, right? Because after you got fired, you got rehired again working for the school district?
Yeah, after I got fired, there was a man by the name of Bill Doyle, who was like the director of the Title I program for all the programs for the kids, low-income kids. He had been coming to visit my classroom. I didn't know why he was coming to visit, but he'd come to visit. And so after it was over, he called me and asked me if I'd be willing to have a cup of coffee with the superintendent. I said, well, I got nothing else to do and I got no job, so yeah. So the superintendent asked me if I would be willing to work with him, report to him, and that I would report to him through Bill Doyle. And I asked them doing what, and it's almost like the questions I was asking the Council of Churches when they asked me if I was willing to work with them, and I asked them doing what. They said organizing, and I asked, what is that? Doing what you're doing, and I said, what am I doing? And so finally, he says, he says, I don't know anything about what's happening to the Mexican kids in our district. He says, all I know is that the population has grown, we have problems, and I don't know anything about it, and I would like you to just work in the, in the district, go in the meetings if you want, talk to parents, work with principals if they ask if that's okay with you. I'd like to give them your name and let them know that they can call you. And so I said, hey, sounds good to me. Yeah. So they gave me a tape recorder and a tape thing, and so that's what I did for almost 2 years. Well, actually a year plus. And then at the end of that year, I started teaching here.
So tell us about your new job at San Jose State. What were you doing at San Jose State? What were you employed? It's also the creation of Mexican American. How are you connected to that?
Yeah, I didn't come here to teach like that. I got involved here because after the walkout and after I got fired and stuff, I was still going to finish my, my professor said, we're going to give it to you anyway, just finish this last class. So I was coming in to finish my last class, and it's an English class, and I'm reading all these novels, and I'm trying to get through them, and all of a sudden, a couple of heavies came looking at me, a couple of guys come up to me and say, oh yeah, what's happening? And I thought I was back in the barrio, And so here he is, and my compadre Humberto. So he already left. Anyway, my compadre Humberto and my compadre Jesus Reina, who were students at the time, they were part of the Chicano students who had also eventually helped the students win the walkout and stuff. They were part of the Mecha and some of the other students here. There was nothing really organized at the time outside of they had the Mecha and things. This was a group of Chicano students who had been together at City College. And they had been there, and there was a professor at City College named, ¿cómo se llamaba? She was a Spanish teacher, Alejandra. I can't remember her last name. But she was working with them very closely. And so she then connected with a professor here in the School of Education named Arturo Cabrera, who liked the idea of what they were doing. They were doing self-help. And so there were a number of them. Some of the people are in this room. I don't, there's a few, I don't know if Maria, you were part, I don't know if you were part of that group, but you came out of Bakersfield, yeah. Anyway, but there were a core of students, maybe about 15 of them, who had been in City College, and they created their own self-help model of working. So they were tutoring each other, helping each other, and so they brought them all at one time. And so these kids were already doing the tutoring, and these guys were already doing all that stuff. Some of the ladies, there were Rosalinda Martinez, who was a powerhouse. School District. There was Olivia Sagun. I mean, there were some real strong folks along with Humberto and Jesus and Danny Hernandez and all these. And so they were already doing, that's how they connected with the kids at Roosevelt, is that they were doing what they did with each other. They started tutoring the kids over there. And that's how I eventually got to know them. So Humberto and Jesus start to ask me to, what am I reading and this and that, and then they invited me to a meeting. I had learned a lesson about 4 years before that when I was organizing in Alviso. Dr. Ernesto Galarza came out and wanted to talk to me and my buddy because we had started a little health clinic in Alviso, in this little, a little old building that used to be like a little city hall for the, for Alviso when it was a government, city. And they had a new city hall, so we had gotten them to let us use that to have a health clinic because the people there were not able to get any kind of transportation to the county hospital. Just like Sophie and them, their first real issue was the health clinic because they had no health clinic. They had to take buses and it was an all-day thing going from there to the county hospital, then eventually finally getting back in the buses. Well, in Alviso, they didn't have any buses going out there. Nothing went out there but the sewage that came out of our toilets and the river, right? And so let's move on here.
Okay, so how do you get connected to, what program were you in when you got hired here?
I wasn't in a program. What happened is that the guys invited me to a meeting. And when I had done that to Ernesto Galarza 4 years earlier or whatever it was, he said, no, I won't go to the meeting. So then he said, you want to know why I'm saying no? I said, okay. He said, because I learned a long time ago, one meeting leads to another meeting. And so I didn't remember that, so they invited me to a meeting. So I said, okay, so the next thing I know, I'm sitting in the president's office with 5 other people. And the police department photographer is there taking photographs of each one of us. And because it was a sit-in, right? Well, lucky me, I was already pissed off because I got fired. I was already pissed off with the students because they were hassling with the students. I was already pissed off because, and then the next thing these guys do is they invite me to a meeting where it's a sit-in. So anyway, survived that, and I knew something was taking care of me because I sure wasn't. And so, but anyway, from there, they wanted me to sit down and meet with them and talk to them some more, so I started meeting with them. We started working together, and so we formed the Committee on Mexican-American Affairs. It was a committee that was made up of them as students. I was no longer a student, but I was there. Jack Lito was brought on. Sophie's husband, Gil, was brought on. Sophie didn't want to, so then the wife of, there were 3 or 4 female students along with some of the, about 4 Chicano students, and then, so it was a combination. It was a community student group, and it was through that body that we began to reach into the college and university to start trying to get people hired, but there was another blowout later that came. And anyway, that's how I got involved at San Jose State. What happened then is that I was, because of my interaction with a lot of these different people, the academic vice president, who was Dr. Burns at the time, asked me if I'd be willing to teach in what they used to call interdisciplinary honors program. And so I talked to the committee, the people, because they were part of, we were trying to build up some accountability, in the university, so that they didn't just hire people who weren't gonna have any contact with Chicanos or who didn't care about the community. And so when they invited me, I thought, well, I should go through the same process as all the rest of them. So Humberto and Jesus and some of the others took me for a beer, asked me some questions, and said, okay, go ahead. So I got the job. And that's how I started teaching here. I taught for a year with Dr. Schofield, where I team taught, the English intern program, and I supervised the English intern teachers for a year, and then after that I started teaching the School of Humanities. I taught there for about six years. This was, Chicano Studies was still being born. It hadn't evolved yet, so.
So when did you become a part of MAGS?
Became part of MAGS. MAGS was in about its third year. And the first professor, let me back up, because MAGS was born out of the Committee on Mexican-American Affairs. A friend of ours, a friend of myself, Consuelo knew Lou, and we had met him when we were, doing the Chicano Teachers Organization, trying to build the Chicano Teachers Organization from the districts in the valley, first San Jose Unified. Friend of ours, Hugh, Carranza, who had taught here back in the late 60s, maybe 70s, taught in the philosophy department. He co-authored a book in logic that is still being used by the philosophy department, but because he hadn't gotten his Ph.D. From Stanford, because they let him go before he could finish it, they let him go. And so, because we had met Lou, and so I was able to talk to Lou when I was offered a job in communication studies. Somebody who was from Roosevelt that had, I remember vaguely, I had met him. He had been teaching there. He was a science teacher, and he had a nephew who was over here, and they gave him my name. And I told him, hey, I don't know if I'm the one you can handle, but I know somebody. So Luca Raza had come in part-time with them. So when we developed when we finally developed the department, the Graduate Studies Department of Mexican American Studies, Lou was the one we turned to chair. And so he was the first chair of that department. And then we brought in some other teachers. Randall Jimenez became one of the faculty. Maria Dorador, who was also from San Jose Unified back in those days, was one of the faculty brought in. Eventually, we brought in Jose Villa and Dr. Garcia from New Mexico became part of the faculty. I was teaching in the school. I was teaching in the what do they call that program? It was a combination of philosophy and literature. I was teaching in that honors program, so I'd been there about maybe 5 years, 6 years, and then some things were happening in MAGS. They were having trouble, and so Jose and some of the other, Lou left to finish getting his other work, and Jose Villa became the chair, so he called and asked if I would come into the department, so that's how I got into MAGS. I transferred from the other School of Humanities, and I transferred into Mexican American Studies, and that's how I ended up Mexican American Studies.
Very quickly, because we're running out of time. Can you tell us about the marches that you and other people led? I think there was one in '72 and the other one in '74. What was the purpose of these marches? I think it's kind of interesting to know that you actually marched from San Jose all the way to Sacramento. That you did twice.
Yeah, the first time was because there was a threat to the funding for EOP. Sacramento was threatening, Wilson, I think, had come into office, one of these they were threatening to cut off monies for EOP. Our students were just starting to get EOP. You have to understand, for those of you who don't really know the state college system in California, you have the University of California, which is meant to serve the whole state, really. Then you have the state universities, and every state is played, you know, every state university or campus is put in place to serve a population within a certain boundary. San Jose State, its service population was Santa Clara County, San Benito County, and part of Santa Cruz. The Chicanada in this county was the biggest concentration outside of Los Angeles, you know, in San Diego. So if our kids didn't come here, when the hell were they gonna go? So the battle here was to try to get the resources that we needed to be able to bring our kids in. Now, it wasn't gonna pay for everything, but as long as we could get some help, we'd be able to hold on to them, keep them. Well, what happened is that as soon as the kids, you know, these students, by the way, the majority of these people were veterans. Tino, Humberto, Jesus Reina, these guys were ex-Navy, ex-Marines, so these weren't young kids. These were, you know, folks who had their experiences, and so when they came here, they you know, had a little bit more maturity. They were looking to do some stuff, and they knew what a battle was, and they were able to live through it. So that when we started, they were the ones who created the first EOP program right here on this campus. It was born right here, and they used the model that they brought from City College to create the EOP Education Opportunity Program here. And as soon as it was born, our African American brothers decided they deserved half of it, even though they were less than one population in this area. These folks had universities all over the country, Louisiana, Mississippi, the East Coast, here, everywhere. This was the only place we had. So we even had to fight with them to keep them from trying to take all the resources, even though there were only a few of them. And that's when, you know, my compadre Jack Brito, you know, Coin, he says, Papa, look, Papa, you know, there's one thing to come to the table and eat and leave something for somebody else, you know. Así que dice que, you know, es bien samarrano, pero no tanto pudo. And he says, when somebody steps on your neck, it doesn't matter who the hell it is, you gotta get it off. So we did battle with.
How many students joined you on that march to Sacramento?
We ended up leaving here with, Maria, you were there.
And Carl,
The second one, Carl. But how many were there? We left with about,
I wasn't here for the first one, I was there for the second one, I'm gonna say pretty close to about 200 people.
yeah,
on that march.
okay, it would have been about the same number coming out of here. The first one, by the time we picked some up in Livermore, we picked some up in Stockton. By the time we hit Sacramento, we were maybe 600 strong, marching into Sacramento. And so we got the local representatives came out, and they vowed to keep that money in, so we survived that. The idea of it, though, didn't come from the committee, the Committee on Mixing Affairs alone. It came from Nick's Pizza. Nick's Pizza had great pizza and it had great beer, and that's where the idea for the march came from, and that's where the idea for the second march came from. The second march was a little bit different. The second march was because we were beginning to develop infighting, you know, on campus here. Different factions wanted, you know, were starting to want to sort of have a little tension between us. Plus there was always that problem of the money. And so the second march was twofold. One was to make sure the money was there for our kids coming in, and at the same time to help us settle some of this business that was starting to take place here, and that's what happened with the second one.
I think that there's a lot of stuff that we can cover. And obviously we're not gonna be able to look at your stories about organizing communities across the United States. But there's also a big problem in San Jose in the 1960s and 70s. The fact that it was virtually impossible for Mexicanos to get jobs in City Hall. It was virtually impossible, in fact, there were no Chicanos in the police department, in the fire department, in the sheriff's department. All the union jobs were actually close to Mexicanos. So in the early 1970s, they had to create this Committee on Chicano Employment. What was that about?
The Chicano Employment Committee, came out of a couple of things. Jackie Barra, who was one of the leaders at the time, different bodies of people doing different things. Jack and a few of his folks picketed one of the construction scenes, and they got, and the cops came and so on. So that created a little bit of tension, and so City Hall started to murmur. The county began to, well, what can we do? So what happened is that we then followed up, and then by we, I mean there was a number. This is where again, many of the same people, Jackie Ibarra, well, Jack was already out there, but Jack Brito, his wife, Sophie, her husband, Gil, Fred, a few others, and his brother Lalo, and then there were about 5 or 6 different families, along with some of us from here who had worked together for a long time with them. We started meeting with the county, the contracts, and who they were issuing contracts with. And so we started, we started raising questions with them about why the contracts that they were giving were all going to companies who weren't hiring Chicanos. And so that dialogue started moving, and eventually the county brought in some of the contractors themselves, and the contractors agreed to form what they called the employment, the Santa Clara County Employment Agency, and they made it what they call a three-legged stool, where you had community, you had City Hall, and then you had the private contractors, and the idea that 2 of those would have to agree on things, and so I didn't move fast enough, and so I ended up being one of the representatives from the community, and myself and Jose Martinez at the time. Jose was good at joining things and then leaving them real quick. So Jose Villarreal, who was one of the original students who walked out from here. That same group are the same ones who walked out, during that first commencement. So Jose and I ended up being on that committee for about 3 years, battling with the developers and others. But out of that came, slowly jobs that eventually started moving out, a change in contracts that were given to construction agencies, with a policy that at least X% of those jobs had to go to local families, local people anyway, including Chicanos and so on.
But you have the fire department, the police department, and the sheriff's department hesitant, refusing to hire people.
Yeah.
And so that's one of the big challenges, though.
Yeah, again, it wasn't like you have an army, you have certain people, you do it. There's one thing that happens when you're gonna do something. You're either gonna do something or you're not gonna do something. As soon as you start doing something, there are gonna be more people coming to you to tell you what you ought to be doing than there are doing it. And so we operated from the principle that, if somebody's gonna sit at that table and have a voice, then we want them up front when we have to do something. We want their ass right there when we have to push and shove and move it. So weren't a whole lot of people ready to do that. But, you know, there were enough people to push, and this is where we started learning to pull in the Justice Department. The Justice Department had representatives who were able to be pulled in, brought in, and then do an investigation, and then based on that investigation, they would decide whether or not they felt there was merit in the issue that you were pushing, and if so, then they pushed whoever the government agencies were, they pushed them, they tried to push them to come to some arrangement, some agreement with the community body, and you know, and these things are still happening all over the country. The end result was what they called a
Agreement of some sort?
yeah, it was an agreement, there was a specific name, but it was an agreement where the government agency would agree to do certain work and to include the hiring of X number of people. Consent decrees, they were called consent decrees. This became a legal item that was embedded with the court, and the courts then oversaw the progress of that. So we were able to do that first with the fire department, the county, then after that with the sheriff's department, and then after that with the police department. The police department, well, I guess you guys have done a pretty good job of keeping that going, because it looks like you've got at least a fairly decent police department now. So, yeah, those were some of the battles there.
I'd like to conclude the conversation that we had with Professor Carrasco by also confirm, I don't know if it's true, but I hear rumors that you were the person who came up with the concept of La Confederación de la Raza Unida.
Yeah, there was I was in San Diego at a conference. I was with Marcos Ortiz, and we were at a conference, and then I think it was the AME, Association of Mexican American Educators. And then it was the first one we'd ever gone to, but we were there, long story short, we're standing in the middle of this place, and I look over and I see Marcos going for his wallet, and some guy standing with him, you know, and I see him take, I say, is he giving this guy money? And then I see him showing him his wallet. And I thought, what the hell's going on? The next thing I know, I feel somebody over here, and the guy's saying, he's showing me the badge, right? It was the INS. And so I, you know, I'm almost laughing to see Marco then. So I pull out my wallet and I show him my thing, and then he says, can you show me another ID? I said, well, so I pull out another one, and he says, you got another? And then I said, let me see your badge again. So he says, can you show me some more ID? Okay, get out of here. So after that happened, Marcos had caught a plane coming back, and so I wandered into National City. And as I'm driving around, I saw a sign saying Chicano, Chicano Federation. So I walked in there, and I asked if I could meet with the director, whatever. So yeah, so I sit down, and I'm sitting there for a half hour, and finally I'm getting ready to take off. So finally this guy goes, hey, come on in. And about this time I'm pissed, I'm sitting out there for a half hour, and this guy named no, it wasn't Baca. Jeez. Anyway, he brings me in, got a couple of his buddies there, and so I said, he starts saying, so what do you want here? I said, well, I just came in because I saw the sign, I wanted to see what you did. So he says, well, that's I was already a little cheap, so I said, well, the hell with you, I don't have to. He said, no, wait, come down this way. Come on, let's talk. So he then explained to me what they had there. They had formed what they call Chicano Federation. And what they had then was just a gathering once a month. Once a month they would have Chicano groups gather and just trade information, and that's what they did. Well, what happened is that when I saw that, I thought, hey, if we had something like that, but a little bit different. And this is where the Comparación, it wasn't what I had originally hoped. I came back, I talked to some of the folks that we were working with, including the people on campus and others, and so we tried to go ahead and have a meeting about this. And what I had envisioned was not a Comparación where the staff did all the work and made all the decisions, not even the board. What I had envisioned was an organization of organizations. I was looking for the idea, can we form an organization where every one of the Chicano organizations in this valley could have a member on that board, and every one of them, every one of their organizations would pay some dues to that board. Not only that, but that every one of them had a different function. For example, GI Forum was military, MAPA was politics, CSO was cultura, you know, such and such. I was thinking, look, you know, Chicano teachers were teachers, you know, educators, whatever. So whenever we had a problem that fit one of those, that organization could take it on, and that organization could grow and develop and get stronger, and then we would support it. And then if it was some other, then that organization, so that instead of having a little group of people